Okay, it's Dr. Mexico back again, and today I'm going to talk to you about the importance of consuming grass-fed beef. So you really can't go anywhere nowadays without seeing grass-fed beef. I mean, it's sold in most big chain grocery stores. You can go to restaurants. In fact, one of my favorite local restaurants, I'll give them a little plug right now, the Gardner Ale House. They have grass-fed beef on their menu. There's really good local farms in most communities that you can go to and get grass-fed beef. Grass-fed beef is everywhere. It's exploding with popularity, and for really good reason. But most people really have no idea why they're even eating grass-fed beef. If you ask them, well, why are you eating grass-fed beef? They say, I don't know, it must be better for me. So here's the quick answer. This is the quick answer, and honestly, this should be enough to explain it. You eat grass-fed beef because the natural diet of a steer or of a cow is grass. It's really that simple. It truly is that simple, and we should stop it there. It should be common sense that you want to consume animal products from an animal that is eating its natural diet. And steers do not eat grain unless they are force-fed grain, right? So this should be the end of the discussion. But I know that most people watching this video are not that easily satisfied with an explanation, so I'm gonna break it down for you. I'm gonna give you the science for it. I'm gonna make it really simple and really easy to understand, because it's important that we understand the biochemistry and the science behind why we should be consuming grass-fed products. So bear with me over the course of these next couple of slides. I'm really gonna make it simple for you, but I'm gonna explain to you scientifically why we should consume grass-fed meat. Here we go. Okay, so I debated on whether or not to show you this table or this chart because some people can get intimidated by numbers, but if common sense alone is not a valid enough argument for you that when we consume animal protein, we should be consuming it from an animal that is obviously eating its natural diet. That should go without saying. But if that is not a valid enough argument, and if you want some science, you want some facts behind it, this is a really great study that was done by Dr. Loren Cordain and his colleagues back in 2002. And it basically compares the nutritional content. Basically, it's comparing the fatty acid concentrations of beef, different types of beef, whether it's coming from an elk, a deer, an antelope, pasture-fed steer, which is grass-fed steer, and grain-fed steer. So what we're looking at is the milligrams of fatty acids per 100 gram sample. So let me just show you this really quickly. I'm going to go over this. I'm not going to make it too technical. Don't make this too hard to understand. It's actually really simple. So primarily we're going to be looking at these two columns here, right? We're looking at pasture-fed versus grain-fed. So think grass-fed versus grain-fed. And we're looking at SAT stands for saturated fat, this amount of saturated fat. MUFA stands for monounsaturated fatty acids. PUFA stands for polyunsaturated fatty acids. And I'll talk about a little bit about each one of these in detail so you understand what they mean. And then you see this N3 PUFA. This means omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acid. N6 PUFA means omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid. 18,2-N6, this is a very specific number of carbon lengths in a fatty acid chain, so 18 carbons. You don't have to understand this stuff, but this is an omega-6 fatty acid. It's actually called linoleic acid. Very high concentrations in grain, and it is inflammatory. And then you see this 18,3-N3, another carbon chain polyunsaturated fatty acid. This is an omega-3, though it's actually alpha-linolenic acid. This is an anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acid. So again, they are important, but I don't expect you to understand this really quickly while I go over it. So just understand saturated fat, right, which most of you know is saturated fat, and then we're going to look at polyunsaturated fats and a breakdown of the different type of polyunsaturated fats. So this is omega-3, anti-inflammatory. This is omega-6, pro-inflammatory. And then the breakdown of the omega-6 and the omega-3, so just think every time you see omega-6, we're talking about inflammation, and every time you see omega-3, we're talking about anti-inflammation. And let's just look at these two charts right here, these two columns we're looking at. So grass-fed versus grain-fed. So let's look at the first part, saturated fat. Grass-fed beef, 910 milligrams per 100 gram sample. Grain-fed, almost 2,000, more than double the saturated fat in grain-fed beef. When we feed we feed the beef, we feed the cows grain to fatten them up. So this is what you get. You get twice the amount of saturated fat when you eat grain-fed steer versus grass-fed steer. That's not the most important problem here. The biggest problem here is when you look at this. Omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. So this is the good anti-inflammatory. Omega-3 in grass-fed, you get 61 milligrams per 100 grams, 46. So you're getting less omega-3s in the grain-fed. And then if you look at the omega-6s, so these are the inflammatory, the pro-inflammatory omega-6s, you're getting 138 pro-inflammatory in the grass-fed meat, and you're getting 243 in the grain-fed meat. So you're getting twice as much inflammation in the grain-fed steer as you're getting from the grass-fed steer. And then if you break them down into the very specific omega-6s and omega-3s, you just notice the same trend, right? So grass-fed, you get less omega-6s, and in grain-fed, you get more omega-6s. Grass-fed, you get more omega-3s, and grain-fed, you get less omega-3s, to the tune of like 2 to 1, twofold times more omega-3s than you get omega-6s. So I hope that makes sense. So this is, again, comparing grass-fed beef to grain-fed beef. Now, if we were to look even further over here, you see that the closer you get to nature, the closer you get to an animal that is consuming its natural diet, the more healthy the composition of the tissue is. I mean, look at when you compare an elk even to a grass-fed. Way better, way better. So 610 milligrams per 100 grams of saturated fat compared to 910. And then same thing when you start looking at the fatty acid composition. Look at this omega-3s in elk, 178 in elk compared to just 61 in grass-fed. So elk way healthier even than grass-fed beef. So I'm not advocating that you have to go out and you have to become a hunter-gatherer, but the closer your meat is to nature, obviously, people, don't make this more complicated than it needs to be, obviously the healthier that meat is. All right, so hopefully that gives you the scientific explanation behind the actual fatty acid composition of grass-fed versus grain-fed. But why does this even matter? Okay, so this is why it matters, people. I know you're looking at this right now and you're saying, Dr. Mexico, what are you doing? You are stressing me out so bad showing me this right now. Listen, don't stress out. I know how you feel. I felt the same exact way the first time I saw this chart as well. I'm not going to go over this whole chart with you, this whole flow chart with you, but this is why it matters. So the omega-6 linoleic acid that we mentioned from the other slide, which comes from grains. So I'll make this super simple. This is biochemistry, but I'm going to make it really easy. So linoleic acid is an omega-6. It comes from grains, okay? When you feed beef or when you feed a cow grain, they take the linoleic acid and they convert it to something called arachidonic acid. Doesn't even sound scary? It's scary. It's pro-inflammatory. Listen, we take as a society tons of corticosteroids and NSAIDs to try to block the inflammation that is a direct byproduct of this arachidonic acid. So every time you eat meat from an animal that is consuming grain, whether it's grain-fed meat or grain-fed chicken, these animals are not supposed to eat grain. Whenever you eat meat, you are getting this arachidonic acid in large quantities, and then your body turns it into pro-inflammatory, what we call eicosanoids. So you don't have to know any of these are, and I'm not even going to mention them to you, but leukotrienes, this is what people are taking Singulair and allergy medications for, prostaglandins, people are taking NSAIDs because they cause pain. So every time you eat grain-fed animal products, you are literally consuming inflammation. That's why it matters. Okay, so some people say, well, why does that matter? Well, let's put it into a more practical standpoint. Let's compare it to a disease that we all know well. Let's compare it to heart disease and why it matters as far as heart disease goes. Okay, last chart. I promise you guys are probably like, dude, Dr. Mexico, this is way too much today. But it's easy, right? And it's easy. So this is Dr. Simopoulos. She is a medical doctor, MD, and she runs a Center for Disease and Genetics out of Washington, D.C., right now, and she's one of the leading authorities on omega-3 fatty acids in the world right now. So Dr. Artemius Simopoulos, and this is a research study that she did way back in 1999 about the importance of essential omega-3 fatty acids. And what she did was she compared the ethnic differences in fatty acid concentrations in thrombocytes. So and the percentage of all deaths from cardiovascular disease. So basically, the amount of omega-6s compared to omega-3s that different ethnic groups consume and how it relates to death from cardiovascular disease. So look at this. This is crazy, right? So here's that thing again, the scary arachidonic acid. It shows back up, right? And then here's eicosapentaenoic acid. It actually sounds like kind of like poetry, right? Eicosapentaenoic acid, EPA. So this is anti-inflammatory. This is scary pro-inflammatory. And then when you look at this, this tells you the omega-6 to omega-3 ratios. And then this is mortality, so death from cardiovascular disease in Europe and United States, Japan, and Greenland Eskimos. So take a peek at this. So in Europe, in the United States, so this is arachidonic acid, right? How much we consume by percentage in Europe and the United States, Japan, and Greenland Eskimos. So Greenland Eskimos consume the least amount of arachidonic acid, and they have the lowest mortality death from cardiovascular disease, right? Greenland Eskimos consume the most, by far, the most amount of eicosapentaenoic acid, omega-3s, way more. Like look at this, 8 times more than Japan and like 16 times more than us in the United States and Europe. The most omega-3s, least amount of cardiovascular disease and death. So check this out though. So if you just look at the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, Europe and the United States, 50-1. Japan, 12-1. Greenland Eskimos, 1-1. So it basically means for every omega-6 that they eat in the Greenland Eskimos, they eat an omega-3. Percent death, percent mortality from cardiovascular disease, Europe, United States, 45%. Percent death in Japan, 12%. Percent mortality from cardiovascular disease in Greenland Eskimos, 7%. Direct correlation to increased omega-3 fatty acid consumption and decreased omega-6 fatty acid consumption leads to a decrease in death from heart disease. So that's why this matters. Last chart, sorry, I'm all done with that. So hopefully this gives you the scientific information that you need to know that, listen, that's why we consume grass-fed meat. So next time you go and you eat a hamburger and you think you're doing something really good because you order the grass-fed burger and then you get it on a bun, you're really, if you get the burger and eat it on a bun, you're really defeating the purpose. So it's not, that's not why we do this. So this is the reason why. Okay, now if you watch this video, you are quite literally an expert in why grass-fed meat consumption is so important. It may have been a little bit painful going through the diagrams I went through and some of the charts, but if you watch it and if you just listen to the explanations, it should really make sense as to why consuming grass-fed foods are so important. So again, today's topic was the importance of eating grass-fed beef, why it is so healthy, why it's in every big chain grocery store nowadays, why it's showing up on local menus, why it's become so popular. Now, after watching this video, you have the exact practical reasons and scientific reasons of why it is so important to consume grass-fed animal products. This is Dr. Mexico. Make it a great day.